can respond with respect. So before I introduce the panelists, I would like to give a little bit of context to our webinar. So Latin America is one of the areas that is involved in stop financing farming. And according with the alerts that we have, the early warning system, and this is a system that we use within our organization, in 2023, Latin American and Caribbean had a higher volume of involvement in the different organizations. So the production in the inequalities haven't reduced. So this doesn't justify this tendency and the public financing for the factory farming. So we're going to think about some opportunities and challenges for the organizations in Latin America, and so they can think of how they can defend together for the factory farming. So we're going to talk about some experiences. And today, our panelists, we have Tasha Nalini, that is our ambassador from Chisalira from the Equator, and Shadi, that is from Sedema, and Marta Flores from Jubilee, South America. I apologize if I didn't pronounce the name correctly. So now I pass the word to Hananini, and we can continue with the next slide in the presentation.
Thank you very much, Camila.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for
Camila,
being
I'm
here.
very thankful.
We'd really like to
to
share
be
more with
here.
you about the coalition and the work that we've been doing throughout Latin America. And as Camila has said, we are the Stop Financing Factory Farming Coalition, S3F. We are comprised of various organizations around the world, including Friends of the Earth United States, International Accountability Project, World Animal Protection, Global Forest Coalition, Sinergia Animal, and more. We have members in youth organizations, indigenous organizations, and some of them are here with us today. And our central demand is to work against financing from development banks that is used to expand factory farming projects. We have more than 25 member organizations in our S3F coalition. Go ahead, next slide. So our vision is to leave behind factory farming and monocultures that are used to feed animals. There's been a lot of media coverage lately of forest fires in Latin America. And if we do a map of that, we can notice that the majority of the forest fires are near soy monocultures and other monocultures with grains that are used for factory farming, feed, and inputs. And so this is specifically something that affects Latin America a lot because historically we've had problems of land, which have been at the center of lots of different rebellions and processes in Latin America. So we have to really, it's so important for us to end the flows of public financing to factory farming. And this is, factory farming is something that has a lot of impacts on human health and the environment. And a lot of people are small producers in Latin America, and we need food sovereignty. And we want to have resilient and fair types of agricultural systems that are directed by the communities with agroecological practices. And life should really be at the center of all of this. And also the need to respect animals and safeguard all living beings. Next. Okay, so you may wonder, Why is it important to do a coalition, a mobilization like this one? It's because we know that at a global level, we have the climate crisis, which is part of the planetary crisis that we're doing, which is due to greenhouse gas emissions around the world, and livestock is one of the big drivers of this. And even if tomorrow we stopped all fossil fuels burning, it would be the emissions from, the emissions from factory farming and deforestation would still put us above the budget that we have in terms of climate, temperature rise and climate change. And so, and factory farming is really responsible for somewhere between 10 and 20% of greenhouse gas emissions. And it's a big driver of deforestation, as we know, in all these ecosystems, including the Amazon and various forest ecosystems that are being threatened. And there's a lot of land clearing to advance the agricultural frontier and the ranching frontier. And so this is a big land use change, and this is a process that also generates different land grabbing processes. This has a lot of impacts on different local peoples and cultures, and it really leads to social injustice and gender injustice in our territories. Next, please. And you may also know that the conference on the Biodiversity Convention at the United Nations is coming up quite soon. And there is a high demand for resources to sustain the various industries. We know that factory farming affects biodiversity in lots of ways, such as habitat conversion, increased demand for resources, change in water quality and environmental contamination, also the propagation of invasive species and overexploitation. And factory farming is also a system that is cruel to animals. All of the impacts of factory farming have a big impact on the land, and the ability of communities to feed themselves is affected greatly. And we know that in addition to the impacts on human communities, there are major impacts of factory farming on animals. There's a lot of violence and abuse of animals, and also overuse of antibiotics to help animals survive through all of the bad treatment that they receive. And so a lot of people even suggest that the pandemic that we recently had is something that could repeat itself if we don't reduce factory farming and these sorts of opportunities for disease vectors to go from animals to people. It's a perfect niche for zoonotic illness. And so what do we do in our coalition? We have created a monitoring system on financing from public banks to Latin American factory farming projects and companies. And we have some statistics here from 2003. So we create alliances and projects in order to resist this public financing for factory farming. We also do advocacy with the personnel and the executive directors at the development banks. We explain why factory farming is not compatible with sustainable development, with the Sustainable Development Goals, with the Paris Accord, and the policies of the banks themselves. And we are demanding that factory farming be excluded from the financing portfolios of these development banks like the World Bank and the IMF. And we want them to meet their commitments to sustainable development. We also want to change the narrative so that we can amplify the voices of the communities and the people who are most affected and people who are living the environmental impacts of factory farming. And we want to elevate the alternatives that exist. So here is a table that shows the different investments that have been made in factory farming by development banks in 2023 by region. And here you can see a map where we see the 56 countries rather, where animal agriculture, industrial animal ag was supported by development banks in 2023. These countries each received support from between 1 and 4 discrete projects. So there are large flows of financing to many countries in Latin America. And another thing that we have done in the S3F campaign is we've been part of marches and platforms on sustainable agriculture and food sovereignty. We went to the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples in New York. We allied ourselves with other organizations like an organization for Black and Indigenous liberation. And we have been putting forth collective demands that are based on the experiences on the ground of many communities. Next. And so we'd like to invite you to join us in our objective of learning about our allied organizations, our on-the-ground organizations and their concerns. And we want to create a mechanism and a plan about how to move forward and generate synergy and collaborate so that we can bring more folks together as part of this coalition. Thank you.
Thanks for the wonderful introduction of the campaign and for sharing so sincerely, Shananini. Now we are going to our second panelist. We have the presentation of the Team Nacionalidad Indígena and in the same block, Xavi.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone who's here. I'm going to share my screen so I can do my presentation. And Booty is also going to chime in. That's my colleague.
If you want to send it to me, I can share it. Okay, give me a second. I just sent it to you.
Shady, you should be able to share now.
You should be able to share now. Okay, great. Okay, I was able to do it. Well, thank you for the invitation and for having me here this afternoon. My presentation is going to be briefly of a particular case in Ecuador, which is Pronaca in Santo Domingo of the Chilas, and what has been the strategy that from SEDEMA we have been working on the last few years. Briefly, I'm going to tell you about the timeline of the investments of the development public banks in Santo Domingo de los Achilas. And this is very important because since 1998, we started to get complaints from the people about the installation of the farms of this area closer to Sachila. And from there, we have got a lot of loans to this organization to increase the capacity for the industrial production, mainly for pork and chicken in Santo Domingo de los Achilas. It's very impressive to see how this company is present in the province and in the whole country of Ecuador. And in this province, we can find the biggest amount of industrial farms in the country, and they have important characteristics, which is the weather and the amount of water and the resources that are needed so that an organization of this type can grow. We understand that even at the beginning of when this organization came to the territory, they didn't have any permits. And once this organization was installed, they started with the process to get the permits after a few years of operation. And on 2008, they started with the development public banks giving loans to this organization, especially with FAE. And in 2028, there was the first lawsuit in the Ecuadorian law system because of the affections that they were suffering, contaminated rivers, healthcare problems for the indigenous people, because every time they went to the river, they were having skin issues. They couldn't develop their cultural activities, and every time was as the time went by, it was really hard to fish. All the fish in the river died, and it was really hard to be sharing territory with this organization. And on 2009, we got a result from the court saying that a committee needed to be created to monitor the waters of the river, and the authorities, I cannot hear her anymore. They said that they needed to create studies of the water, but there was a lack of resources to complete those studies. In 2010, there was a complaint in front to the IFC, and I'll tell you what happened with that complaint in 2011. The report that was published, and I'll tell you about it later. And in 2013, the International Bank of Development gave this organization another loan, and in 2021, the two banks gave another loan to Pronaca. And I'll tell you briefly what the mechanisms of the banks are, and the ones that we have used as a strategy to interfere, in this case in particular, with Santo Domingo EFC. And the BID have given millionaire loans to this organization for their expansion. IFC has, and the BID Invest have entities that supposedly are independent from the mechanisms or the people that give the credit. And those are the compliance advisors organization and the MISI, which is the investigation and consultation mechanism. And they get complaints based on any loans that they have given. For instance, if they're not accomplishing the objectives of the loan, and if the organization that requested the loan it's not complying with certain things from the loan. And these organizations were created to avoid the negative impact, especially for indigenous communities in terms of the environment and other topics. And the first one that I'll tell you about in this one, and the first complaint in front of the IFC in 2010, the complaint was created by the CAO, and they created a report saying that even though they recognize that the annual reports are insufficient to show that the operations are not following the guidelines of the IFC recognizes that deficiency and proposed to take measures. And even though they recognize that, they said that they don't need another audit, and the loans continue. And on 2021, the credit was $50 million that was given to this company. And then after 2021, Vidinvest also gave them $50 million to Pronaca to increase the production of chicken and pork, to increase productivity, modernize the installations, and improve internal policies. And this is the only information that we got from the development banks. And this was one of the biggest problems that we have seen from the public information. And obviously what the banks say is that their clients have private information that cannot be shared, but information from about like how many farms, how many animals should be public information, but it hasn't been shared. And they're defending that as being sensible information about their clients. Last year, there was a report about environment and social impacts about the last two investments that the development public banks gave this organization. And in this report, they established which are the development strategies or policies that were not followed or that were violated by the organization in the Achilas territory. And I want to tell you that these processes have taken a long time, and the Achilas people are very friendly and calm people. And that's why they didn't start the direct investigation. They wanted to have a dialogue with the organization and try to resolve the environmental issues that they're having, but that wasn't possible because the organization didn't want to have that conversation. They deny it, and they didn't want to talk to SEDEMA, and they claimed that they had their own intermediaries in the community and they didn't want a third party involved in this conversation. I want to highlight that the complaint that was sent to Lacao in 2023 with the Sachilas people was also sent to MISI Vidinvest, and it was sent on September 15 of 2023. And the answer that it was accepted after a long process and the conversation process didn't take place. Now, 11 months later, up until August 9th, they have reactivated the complaint mechanism. And this is a strategy that from our perspective seemed adequate because it didn't come through the legal system of our country that we know that has a lot of fails and is very slow and can be monetized. And it also has its negatives. It's a long process. The Achilas peoples continue living with this situation daily, and it's a timing issue because it takes a long time. And another negative is that we have to remember that they are their clients. They could have these independent mechanisms, but at the end of the day, they're their clients, and they will trust the client that they gave millions of dollars to. And the thing that is harder for us to understand in this process is that there are no sanctions, there's no limits for the project or an option to retract the money. What they're trying to do is that just get the organization to comply. There's no sanctions. They will just establish that in a period of time, they will have to follow the guidelines. And what's important to highlight that is positive is that with the MISI, that it's the organization that we have been working with. It seems like they are an independent organization. It could be important in this complaint process. They have been very professional and serious with very interesting teams. And another good thing is that we were able to get the permanent support from BIC, which is the Bank Information Center, that has helped us throughout this process to get to the point that we're at right now. That's what I wanted to present today. Thank you. And I wanted to pass it to Woody, who's from the Sachilas people, and I want you to hear from him firsthand what's happening in Santo Domingo. Woody? Yeah, I'm here. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. I want to say hi from our territory, from our trenches. Tell us, Woody. Yeah, I'm sad because we are having a lot of odors. It's summertime, the rivers are dried, and the organization now doesn't have water. And when they don't have water, they start to remove the water from the lower soil, and the smells get stronger. And we're sad because many people are fighting against the organization, and they're now giving up. We're losing. It's really sad to see that where we used to have rivers where we go swimming, now we can't. Rivers where we go and find our food, we cannot do that anymore. And throughout time, children cannot practice fishing, swimming. They're not enjoying their water, their crystal waters. And that's a huge loss. We are a territory with a lot of knowledge and wisdom and ancestral wisdom, and this problematic with this organization will cause that in 20 years we won't have fertility, because this industry is creating huge problems for the territory. They're dividing leaders. The people that are fighting are seen as crazy people, and we don't know when this will end. My parents have been fighting against this organization for 25 years, and they're feeling weak because they have got threats from the organization, from the leaders that are in favor of Pronaca. And that's a huge weakness. My dad tells me that he's really tired, that he cannot keep on fighting, that everybody's fighting against him, and that he has no guarantees that he will be walking on the street and someone will hurt him. So that's really sad for me and for my dad, who won't be able to keep fighting. And that's why I joined him in the fight. And here we are. I'm very thankful with all your organizations, the leaders and the young people that are in each sector supporting. Now in Santo Domingo de Sachila, we were nominated as the capital of meat. That means more livestock, more production. I don't know if you saw the publication where the governor is speaking, and he said, Pronaca means sustainability. treatment of the water. But that's false. The people that live in the territory knows that that river is more and more contaminated. And then the city next to Pernaca is also growing. We always say in Santo Domingo, there's more pigs than people. There's 400,000 people and 50 farmers, so 50 farms. So there's more animals than people, and the industry keeps growing. And now we're having also livestock. So that's our weakness. And that's the pain that our territory is going through. Thank you, Woody. Woody.
Thanks for sharing and for your story to Shady and to Woody. This is very important for us. Before going to the next panelist, I will ask Luis to make a comment. Luis, would you like to make a comment?
Something, Luis? Luis, if you'd like to speak. Maybe he's unable to at the moment.
I think he can't speak now. So I think Luis can do his comment later and we can continue with the presentations. All right, Luis? Okay. Then we will continue, and when Luis can, he does his comment. We will go to the last presentation. That is the presentation by Marta Flores from Jubilees of Americas. You have the word, Marta. Thank you for being here with us.
Hello, hello. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you so much to all my colleagues here. And it's a pleasure to be here sharing with you. I've been listening with great interest to the presentations. And I want to thank you for the space to share the experiences and the perspectives from our side. My name is Marta. I'm from El Salvador. I've been working for many years, not just on the various regions, but also the perspectives from on the ground that really connect us. And I'd like to share with you perhaps not just the issue of the experiences themselves, and I hope I have time, but perhaps some of the reflections and debates that we've been having in this context of the financing model. And maybe one of the first elements, and I'll pick out like 3 elements in this debate. First of all, the understanding of the fact that when we talk about financing for factory farming and the role of these mechanisms that supply the different sources of financial resources from the various public banks and the expansion and domination of the factory farming industry and monocultures for factory farming, it has a harmful impact on life and on the land and territories And of course, it's part of an imperialist strategy and also one that is sustained by colonialist and also heteronormative systems. And so for those of us who live in the global south, we don't have the same rights and we're often not on the same level playing field with the north. So this type of vision sustains a structural racism that is expressed through the financial system and how it operates around the world. So I'd like to remind you of something that has happened recently. We know that this modern system, quote unquote, modern system of financing imposes the model of finance institutions who for 80 years have been promoting so-called modernity around the world and sort of reconfiguring things. This all happened after the Second World War. So what's gone on in the last 80 years and what has been the role of these financial institutions? And how can we talk about their impacts? So we have to understand that this is connected to all the different arenas of life and that the banks are not just a source of financing, they are a strategy and a tool and really the face of the system in Latin America and the International Development Bank and the IMF and the World Bank. These are huge institutions. They don't just affect financing, but all arenas of life, really. If we realize the different types, the different moments of coup d'etat that we have seen in Latin America, always in the background was the figure of the IMF or the World Bank, and behind all the supposed natural disasters, which aren't really natural disasters, but rather socio-environmental crimes, we can see the presence of reconstruction, banks involved in reconstruction. And so banks pop up to finance reconstruction, and this is part of how they have an influence. And so they also have a big role in budgetary decisions in our national governments in Latin America and across the South. And of course, these national budgets are oriented toward the corporate vision that these banks have and supposed investment. And so how can we connect that macabre role that they have with the extractivist mentality or the extractivist system? It's not just about land, water, and air. But it's also has to do with a process of appropriation of struggles and processes of historical recovery of territories with ancestral rights. And there are disputes between so-called development and a model that criminalizes and does violence to all forms of life, people, animals, the environment, water, all of this based on the priorities, the corporate favoring priorities. And so it's important also to understand that there's an intimate connection between finance, democracy, and rights, like the rights that we have over our own bodies and ancestral and cultural rights that our peoples have to manage and use their own resources. And so I think it's important as well, and this has been said before, I think, I'll be wrapping up, I realize I don't have too much time, but the expansion of the agro-industrial model and the deepening of extractivism across all of our territories, including human bodies, including homes and homelands and forms of production. And in the background, we see the agenda of taking from these communities, these vulnerable frontline communities, and also weakening their social organizations, social movements. And we can see that factory farming increases all of this. And it has an additional arm, which is monoculture plantations, which rely on pesticides. And that is tied to genetically modified food. And so, to try to sum up what's going on in our territories here in our region, people are facing every day these types of battles, but these battles are no longer fragmented against the model of the expansion of factory farming and industrial farms. We are uniting to speak out against the banks, the public banks that put forth financing for these types of projects, which are so harmful and extractivist. And so there's a criminal structure. It threatens our lives, our territories, everything around us. And so the response has to be an integrated response and a coordinated response. And I think it's also important to understand that all of the experiences and all of these areas of struggle are essential. And so from this perspective of popular emancipation or different pedagogies or different histories, we also have the responsibility to undertake this essential work and to rebuild a narrative, because really we have to express and build the resistance that we need and that historically has been emerging. And so the resistance from the territories that we have seen that are already confronting this perverse system of factory farming, this is already happening. And 2 or 3 days ago, they assassinated another leader in Honduras who was fighting to defend the autonomy of territories against monoculture plantations. And so they're continuing to kidnap and target leaders, men and women leaders who oppose the perverse model and the militarization that accompanies it. And they're trying to erase all of the organizations who are in this struggle. Why? Because sadly, the financial system is really present in all state structures. And I'll repeat, whoever finances the national budgets, well, it's the public development banks. They decide what percent goes to health, what percent to education. And they also ensure the maintenance of a structure that contributes and perpetuates the indebtedness of countries. Let's remember that out of 50 national budgets in our region, paying most of their revenues to just pay those debts and to the public banks. And so we have to really recognize that. And this is a space in Mesoamerica, Latin America. It's a region where we are standing up and we're defending our food sovereignty, we're defending our right to water and defending our right to our own histories. And we're also here very motivated and organized and with a lot of respect and thank for this space. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll continue to see one another. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much
very
for your
much,
powerful
Marta, for
talk,
your
Marta,
powerful words.
and for all the presentations. They were all very rich and very powerful today. So thank you very much for all the speakers. It was wonderful. And now it is time of a dynamics of a collective discussion to reflect better about all the presentations and the talks and about the issues. So I invite you to reflect about a question that we have, a guiding question, which is what strategies or messages can we use to expand the reach of the Stop Factory Farming campaign in Latin America? So we will discuss this point together. If you want to share any idea, comments, suggestions, and now it's open. Luis, if you are there, you can open your microphone to speak. Now the space is yours. Thanks to the speakers.
Yes, remember that Luis had his hand up. Luis. Okay, I think we may have lost Luis. Okay, so I might just say something really quick, if you don't mind. I think it's important to identify. We're here talking primarily about Latin America. So we have to identify the pressure that our territories are facing. Many of them are associated with agribusiness and all of the very painful situations that we're experiencing, not just in the Amazon, because there are some terrible forest fires going on, also in the Southern Cone. And this is really related to the industrial factory farming model, and particularly livestock. And it's a model, of course, that also includes monocultures of soy as animal feed. And so there have been successful campaigns to divest from fossil fuels, for example. And we are saying, how can we raise our voices to divest or take money away from these huge and contaminating factory farms? They have other sources of financing. They don't need the public banks. And so what can we do in this sense? What can our campaign do? What are some key messages that we could get out in order to have strategies where we feel like we're really reaching the banks and raising awareness about their practices? Because they're really not changing their practices. The Inter-American Development Bank, for example, said that they're trying to support sustainable things, like, for example, in Bolivia, in the Amazon, but these are fragile ecosystems, and they're not in line with the stated values of these public banks. And so what can we do? What strategies can we use to work together so that we can send a message to the banks telling them to stop investing so much money in these corporate activities that are affecting our territories in such terrible and harmful ways, and also generating water contamination and gender injustice, and they're grabbing land and resources and destroying forests. And that's what this business is doing. We want to talk about the environmental injustice, the social injustice involved in factory farming, and we want to see what we can do to really share these messages and expand our reach in a joint way, thinking about all the things that are going on in the Latin American region, and basically the World Bank Group and the Inter-American Development Bank They are allowing factory farming practices to expand and expand, and these are for-profit businesses. They are contaminating, they deforest, they also violate human rights. So what do you think we should do to think about this and to get together to work to stop the flows of funding to factory farms?
Go ahead, Marta. I don't know how to raise the digital hand. Honestly, I just want to share some reflections in the frame of the work that we have been doing for a few years in terms of the financial topic. First, I think, and this is a reflection of the processes from our side, we think that the objective that the financial institutions have will never change. There's no way to humanizing or minimizing that, or to have a lighter vision of the goal of the World Bank or the bid will never change that logic. That's how the structure was thought out. But I feel that any initiative, any coordinated or collective action should put in the front, to the front line, to highlight the impact that that financing has for those territories. Because there are other ways to generate a critical, thoughtful process. And I really don't know the objectives of this campaign, but I think a key element is to put as a priority the real impact to the territories. And that can only be done through the voice of the front lines, the protagonists of the problems, the people that are there. And that's why it's important to hear the experiences of the people from Ecuador and our guests. And those voices, the people cannot be represented by anyone. The fight needs to be represented by the people in the front lines. So the face of any action needs to be the people through their experiences, their wisdom, through their language. And I think that maybe that's just my suggestion, and also reinforcing what Andrea's writing. I think it's also important to bring a historical narrative and connect it to the reality, because the problematic in our territories is not fragmented. The livestock monocultives, and they all have consequences from this model and that have repercussions. And another thing, a suggestion, is that I would like to not summarize, but have concrete messages to bring a critical opinion in terms of how this affects, and also understanding how this affects everybody. This model that happens in the Amazon doesn't only affect that area, it affects everybody, because tierra territory, it's linked to all territories, not just in terms of territory, but in terms of the energy and the connection that we all have in this earth. And I think that has a political connotation that needs to be highlighted. And finally, all campaign process and actions should have a component of virtual components and thinking how and where we want to, what we want to achieve and how, and thinking about the local radio stations, the local debate, and bringing that spirit to other spaces, bringing that strength from the locals. I just wanted to say that. Thank you. Thank you. It's very important to reflect about the interconnectivity between all the injustices and the ways of connecting with the local organizations, and that they should be the ones talking about the impact, including communication strategies like you were saying, like the radio. Anyone else that would like to share anything else? Why are we all so shy today? Because we don't have just people from Latin America here, we have people from other territories as well. That's why we have interpretation. We know that there's no revolution, as the director of the coalition to save the forest says, but we need to talk about the context. If you have any reflection, you're welcome to do so. I thank you, Andrea. I was very shocked with Don Luis's testimony, and I think it's insane that there's no way to protect him from the situation that he's at. He's fighting a World Bank. So it's like thinking how in this coalition can organize a mechanism to accompany Luis or people like Luis. So if something happens, we all need to be in the know. Very interesting. Thank you. Some of the strategies that we have used from S3F has been sending letters before the projects get approved, indicating the impact that it can have, many times through knowledge and testimonies that were collected previously. That's why we would like to work with local organizations, as Marta was saying, so we don't so we can support them. And I don't know if you can think of a suggestion to connect, because sometimes, and some people of the coalition from the S3F follow up on the projects that can come to the territories, but that's something that it's not always happening in the territory as such. There's a lot of difficulties on following up. So we gotta tell the communities what is happening and how they can be added. We want to ask them how that strategy can be used and if it's adequate, so they can have a regional and local support that is genuine and strong. I cannot see your name, but go ahead. Is this CC? No, I think that was an old hand. I think Luisa Valeta.
I think we
I
should
think we need to
enable
enable
his
her
microphone.
or his microphone. I think they're all enabled. Can we find out what's going on?
Who's trying to speak? No, it's able. I've asked one.
Luis, we think that your microphone is enabled. It must be something about your device because everybody can unmute.
Luis, if you want to share in the chat and we can discuss here, maybe that's a solution. Does someone else
If
have a
anyone
comment
has a
to do
comment before we
wrapping
final,
up here? I think that's all. Thank to all that spoke, Martha, Isis, everyone who shared with us. Thank you very much for your presence, for being here today, for here to our panelists that made incredible presentations, bringing a lot of insights so we can reflect. We will have more encounters like this one, and maybe we will be able to have more ideas and to reflect more. And thanks to the work of our translators here, be aware of your emails. We will send you the materials and the links, and we hope you be in our next seminars. Thank you very much. See you. Thank you.